Good morning, and welcome to today's videos. One thing about having 4 boards, I can potentially get ahead on videos. Let's talk about the 1952 season. There's less than 1,000 views on yesterday's video last time I checked. I will not stop making historical videos. It's not going to happen. And 1952 is a good example of why. Because this is where all this crap starts. The Detroit Red Wings, dominant. And dominant doesn't even begin to describe it. They scored 20 more goals than anybody else. And they allowed 23 goals less than anybody else. Meaning they're a minimum 43 goals better than anybody else over a 70-game schedule. 44, 14, and 12 is their record. Next up's Montreal at 34, 26, and 10. The fading Toronto Maple Leafs 29, 25, and 16. Boston Bruins at 25, 29, and 16. And of course, the Rangers and the Hawks missed the playoffs. The Rangers 23, 34, and 13. And the Chicago Blackhawks, who are the welfare case of the NHL at this point, 17, 44, and 9. How bad's the welfare? We'll get there. Alex Delvecchio makes his debut at the Wings, because when you're the best team in the league, you need a rookie who's going to make you even better. Right? The Red Wings traded 6 players to Chicago for 1. One of those 6 players who went to Chicago ended up being top 10 in assists that year. They still only had 17 wins. And Detroit didn't lose any ground whatsoever. That's how insane the difference is between Chicago and Detroit. Detroit had already sent Harry Lumley, their young, awesome goaltender, off to Chicago when Terry Sawchuk came in, and that didn't help either. Sawchuk gets 44 wins again this season. So Terry Sawchuk, nice even number, and cruising towards what will become the largest win total in NHL history of its time. Elmer Locke of the Habs, the Montreal Canadiens, hits 550 career points, which was a record at the time. 550. March 23rd, 1952, Bill Mosienko scored 3 goals in 21 seconds for the Chicago Blackhawks in a season where the team barely averaged 2 goals per game. So Mosienko at least got 3 of those 158 goals in a 21-second period. November 24th, 1951, Chicago had something happen to them, which people who watched Chicago this year will kind of see as being similar. A 46-year-old trainer, Mo Roberts, filled in for an injured Harry Lumley, formerly of the Detroit Red Wings, in a 6-2 Chicago win over the Detroit Red Wings. It was his first appearance on the ice in 16 years. So there's no backup goaltender in Chicago. It's, Harry's hurt. You can play net, right? Are you serious? That's Gordie Howe and Bill Lindsay, or Ted Lindsay, and not Bill Lindsay, God no, Ted Lindsay, and Sid Abel, and what the hell, like, no. In you go. What's this Delvecchio kid? In you go. Don't worry about it. The credit for the win still went to Harry Lumley, though. Lumley finished the season with 17 wins. So there's your Scott Foster of 1952. Turk Broda, March 27th of 1952, became the first goaltender to play 100 career playoff games. So this is why when people talk about records now and they look at the records from back in the 40s, 50s, those records, they're nothing. They didn't play as long of a schedule. Their playoffs weren't as long. So they had half the time in the playoffs to get any kind of a record, and they played about 15% less games than what we play now. So it makes a difference over a period of a career. April 15th, 1952. Yes, Detroit, I have to mention this, don't I? Pete and Jerry Cusimano, owners of Detroit's Eastern Market, hurled an octopus onto the ice at the Detroit Olympia, known as the Great Red Barn. And that's where the throwing of octopi starts. During the playoffs now, 2 of the giant octopi are hung high in the rafters to signify you need 16 wins. The octopi, 8 arms, you need 8 wins, and that's what happened. The Hart Trophy that year goes to Gordie Howe. The Art Ross goes to Gordie Howe. The Calder goes to Bernie Geoffrion. Boom Boom is now in the league for the Montreal Canadiens. Of course, he will play a major role in the Montreal Canadiens becoming a force later on in this decade. The Vezina Trophy goes to Terry Sawchuk of Detroit due to the fact he had the lowest goals against average by a mile. The Lady Byng goes to Sid Smith of the Toronto Maple Leafs. 8 wins. So why would somebody be so cocky as to throw an octopus onto the ice for 8 wins? Because Detroit gave their fans plenty of reasons to be very, very confident. Round 1 against Toronto, they didn't allow a goal in the first 2 games. They went 3-0 and 1-0. In Toronto, they win 6-2 and 3-1. They sweep the Toronto Maple Leafs. This dynasty, gone. Gone. The Detroit Red Wings are the new powerhouse in the NHL, and they left no doubt in anyone's mind. Montreal then plays Boston. We know how this works out, right? If you're a Boston fan, you know how a Boston-Montreal series works out, right? Historically, Montreal wins game 1, 5-1. Montreal wins game 2, 4-0. Boston wins game 3, 4-1 after scoring 3 goals in 1 minute and 2 seconds in that game. They were unable to replicate that throughout the rest of the series, though. Game 4, Boston ties the series with a 3-2 win, and in game 5 in Montreal, the Boston Bruins win 1-0. So Boston moves on to the finals. Crap, it's a best of 7. Montreal beats Boston in double overtime, and then Montreal wins game 7, 3-1, because Boston doesn't like playing Montreal in the playoffs. It's just reality. It's just reality. The way before I'm on this planet, Boston is getting owned in the playoffs by the Montreal Canadiens. Then in the Stanley Cup Finals, Montreal realizes it may not matter. Detroit goes into Montreal for games 1 and 2 and wins 3-1 and 2-1, and they don't allow a goal in games 3 and 4. They win both games 3-0. So they don't allow a goal in games 1 and 2 here. They don't allow a goal in games 3 and 4 down here, meaning the Detroit Red Wings at home in the playoffs didn't allow a goal against either Toronto or Montreal. 2 NHL powerhouses, and Detroit slams the door shut at home. That is as impressive a run as you're going to see. And I know we're going to get into runs by the Islanders and Edmonton and all this as this series rolls along. But for the original 6 era, that run by Detroit, that is very impressive stuff. 8 wins in a row to the Stanley Cup. Not a single loss. Gordie Howe, emerging as a legend, had 86 points that season in 70 games. And the fact he wins the Art Ross and the Hart, I'm thinking throughout this series, that's probably the first time that's happened, that somebody's won both. It's not going to be that unheard of as we go through these videos that a guy would win both the Hart and the Art Ross. But those two aren't tied together early on in the Art Ross trophies world. And of course, boom, boom, as I said, Terry Sawchuk. You're getting into some really big names, some huge Hall of Fame names. And of course, it is the year that we first see an octopus on the ice in Detroit. And that will become a running theme for Detroit. Even though after this dynasty, and this is a dynasty that we're witnessing for Detroit, they do go a long time in between cups. And it does become a Montreal and Toronto show at some point in this series. But for today, it's Detroit. So there you go, Wings fans. Another Stanley Cup win for you guys. And Montreal comes up just short in the playoffs. And by just short, I mean they got swept. Toronto came up just short, too. They got swept. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Got hit with your history for today. I'll talk to you again soon.